This is a reading this morning, not from Whispers, which is what we usually read from, but rather a book called Metaphysical Meditations, a little book filled with all of the power of the universe, meditations written by Paramahansa Yogananda in various aspects of the spiritual path. And I'm going to read one this morning from a section on devotion and worship. May thy love shine forever on the sanctuary of our devotion, and may we be able to awaken thy love in all hearts. O Father, receive thou the fervor of my soul, the devotion of incarnations, the love of ages that I have kept locked in the vault of my heart. Divine Father, in my temple of silence, I have made a garden for thee, decorated with the blossoms of my devotion. With aspiring heart, with zealous mind, with flaming soul, I lay at thy feet of omnipresence all the flowers of my devotion. O Spirit, I worship thee as beauty and intelligence in the temple of nature. I worship thee as power in the temple of activity and as peace in the temple of silence. First, let me say that I haven't been in the temple on Sundays in the last 2 weeks for various reasons. So I feel such a sense of renewal just looking out, and the temple's not quite back to normal yet because we've given everybody more space, but the rows look the same, your faces look the same. It's wonderful to be able to see in everyone's eyes. And I agree with Luhari, thank you, to hear this really beautiful music. The musicians they've done so magnificently, but everyone's been saying it's so hard to sing with a mask. And I really heard this morning just what comes through when there's no mask there. So now we all need to pray that we can stay maskless. I've had this extraordinary pleasure this past year now, almost, of teaching a class. I say little because the book's very little, not the one I just read from, but the one I'm about to talk about, called Secrets of Emotional Healing. And I've been talking about each of these secrets. There are 31 in each of Swamiji's books called Secrets. And I don't know when he started writing these. I don't remember what year it was, but he's written many of them now, maybe close to 20. Secrets of meditation, secrets of marriage, secrets of radiant health and well-being, just secrets of everything that we would need to live by. And it was suggested to me that I could teach a class, an ongoing class from the book Secrets of Emotional Healing. And it was an inspiration, not on my part, but Sai Ganesh had the idea, and it was just fabulous. It's worked. But as I've been telling the people who are taking the class, so some of you have heard this, for the first many weeks of teaching, it was anxiety producing. Though I think week number 1 or 2 was on secrets of overcoming anxiety, so that was good. But it was because Swamiji writes sometimes one sentence or 2, almost at the most, every once in a while 3. But the book is tiny. It's like this. There's only room for so many sentences, and almost never is the topic a topic that you can research in our library of, you can put a word in and see what all was written about that word. Easy to do it with devotion, with grace, but not so with loneliness, anxiety, dull-mindedness, doubt. These are the topics we've been going through. And I kept thinking to myself, how will I possibly speak for an hour about these 2 lines? Pretty quickly, I would say by about week 3 or 4, I realized that Swami Kriyananda had filled those 2 sentences with so much inspiration, with so much truth, with such extraordinary depth and yet expansion, that it was actually pretty easy to get up and speak about it. And although it would look like each one of those, how do you overcome depression, anxiety, doubt, you would think the answer's always the same, but it's not. And I started getting this image some weeks into the class of this massive balloon-type structure, but exquisite, not just any old balloon, huge, like out to infinity, colors that were magnificent, and an infinite number of threads, pieces of thread or ribbon coming from that space, from that uplifted, expansive holder of all of this coming down, and that although we would grab one each week, if we could get still enough and go deep enough and listen through a different story with each of those little ribbons, we always wound up in a place of magnificence. And it was never by talking about the problem, ever. I didn't speak for 45 minutes or an hour about depression. That would be depressing. I always thought, often in medicine, and particularly now in these days of big medical clinics and HMOs, and in the field of psychiatry, if you have a problem, they send you into groups where you sit around with all of these other people who have that problem. So there are 12 people with anxiety sharing their stories of their anxiety. This is not common. I mean, I don't know how many of my patients have come back and said, it's not useful. It could be if there were a very skillful person in there. But without bringing the spirit of it, without having a thread or a ribbon with which we can lift ourselves up out of the problem, it's just so easy to stay with the problem. And it's truly been a magnificent experience of, again, expansion, of deep spiritual searching. This last week, the subject was irritation. And 2 lines, 2 very short sentences. And if I went to, I call it Google, but it's not really Googling, it's searching for the word irritation, not one reference throughout all of Ananda. I was finding that rather irritating. It's amazing, since we did the class on irritation, how many times I found myself being irritated, and I can't get away with it anymore, because Swamiji so brilliantly, again, lifts us up. But as I was sitting and meditating before that class, which was on Friday, because I really had no idea what I would say about it. None. So I came in here and we meditate together for 5 minutes. But this is pure grace. All of a sudden, I saw once again how the whole way out of that experience of meditation was further into the astral spine than we had ever talked about. That anything that was irritating was about being willing to keep being pulled down, to be contracted, to be dark. And that which would neutralize irritation was about everything that was up and positive and light. Anyway, I won't say more about it. That whole course is still up and available. It's ongoing, but you can always plug in. And again, the wisdom of Swamiji is just so apparent in that little book. I haven't read them all, but I'm sure it would be true of all of the Secrets books. I'm embarrassed to say this, but last night, for the first time, I went to the book called The Story Behind the Story to find out what was on his mind when he wrote these secrets. And he very beautifully says, and I'm paraphrasing now, that these books came out of his desire to follow the command of his guru. That's his word, command. And he interpreted that to mean that Yogananda wanted him to show all of us that these spiritual teachings are relevant in every aspect of our lives. And then Swamiji, he said, I sat with each of them making the point, needing to make the point, which of course he did, in every line, that every line would be imbued with a spiritual answer. These are like, what do you call them? Like seed thoughts. So every emotion has all of the spiritual answers in the universe right in it. It doesn't matter what we were talking about. I had never read that, but I was getting that feeling. Like, imagine that. There's always a great big spiritual truth that comes through. And I thought I was discovering something new, of course, but it's been a grand experience because that was Swamiji's intention. Now, I'm saying all of this because there's many ways that the reading this week could be picked up. It is so, that's always true. I mean, people who are giving this talk around the world will come at it from a different place, not just today, but every Sunday. But today, right in the talk, I mean, you could talk about prayer. How do we pray? You could talk about grace. You could talk about faith. You could certainly talk about devotion. There's just so many beautiful aspects to this reading. And the two things that came to me that I just wanted to highlight, and why I was talking so much about the secrets, is because I feel that truth, that same truth is manifested in this story. That woman who touched Jesus's robe could have gone to Jesus in many ways. She could have begged him for a healing. She could have started talking about her medical problem because she was hemorrhaging, it says in the Bible. There were so many ways that she could have made that experience so much more worldly, which is what so many people do. Peter was trying to say to Jesus, really, you're just being crushed on all sides here. Everybody's touching you. But Jesus said, nobody's touching me like that. She's touching me like that. I felt power going out of me. And he meant, that sentence means, she was drawing something from me. I was actually able to heal her. Not probably, as Swamiji says somewhere else about this reading, he said, can you imagine how many people wanted a healing from Jesus as they were walking with him? Everybody wanted something from Jesus. Everybody always wants something from the teachers. Why did it come to this woman that she was instantly healed? Why her of all people? And I realized, I mean, Swamiji explains it beautifully, but she wasn't coming to Jesus just begging for something. She wanted to be healed. She came to him knowing for sure that she would be healed. She came to him with so much love and devotion. She wasn't confused. She didn't wonder. She didn't have a question about whether God could grant her what she needed. She came up with her heart wide open, not just taking, but giving, so that there could be this extraordinary exchange of energy. She wasn't trying to talk about depression at the level of depression, or anxiety, or loneliness, though they're very real problems in life. And part of each of these talks, every one of them, has had to be to acknowledge the truth of it, because we're human beings. Probably every one of us has been a little depressed, or a little anxious at times, or lonely, or on and on. And then there are some people who have been extremely depressed, and that needs to be dealt with respectfully and with care. So I'm not just writing it off, but again, nothing happens if we stay at the problem-oriented place. We know this is one of the main tenets of our path, is that we are solution-oriented people. And that solution can look many ways. But in this reading, what we're being told, what we're being able to see, is that true divine love, that unambivalent, unequivocal, not frightened love of God that just comes with practice. Devotion is a practice. There's no other way to learn it. You cannot, I was just saying this in our Inspire Your Practice class, you can't read about devotion and get it. You can do the affirmation, and if I remember, I'll close this talk with the prayer that Swamiji gives for devotion in his affirmations. It's beautiful, but it's a practice. It's constantly opening our heart, trying to see God in everyone and everything. And the more pure that devotion is, devotion for and with the divine, the easier it is for God's energy to flow through us. This is why Krishna could say to Arjuna, Krishna says it much better than I will. So I'm going to read. Oh dear. Krishna says, to those who meditate on me as their very own, and those words are capitalized here. I love that. Who do we stay with? Who's our very own? Where do we have that experience? Interestingly, we're doing a baby blessing after our festival today. And having just spent a week with my grandchildren, I realized you do that, particularly with your children, with your grandchildren, with these little beings, these souls who come to you, and you hold them if we're doing it well, it's not our very own like your mine, but with the understanding that that is a soul who chose to come through us. It's so easy to love them, even when they're being really bad. You can't help but love them because they're so pure, and their love of you is so pure. I realized every time I walked into my home this past week, it was like having two puppies there. It was always like, Shanti, they were so happy to see me. It's that kind of love that we're talking about, that kind of give and take, but in a very fluid way with God. Then God himself can flow through us, not just to us, but through us, which is what happened. And Krishna goes on to say, ever united to me by incessant worship, I make good their deficiencies and render permanent their gains. What a promise. Now, he does say incessant, so that's a little like, yikes. Can I do this every minute of every day? Probably not, but we just keep making effort. We keep moving in that direction, knowing that God loves us already. He is love. He's that state, divine love. He loves us already. He knows us already. We do not have to feel badly or unworthy in front of God. We just need to be like those little kids, or really like puppies. Why do people love animals? Do they ever disappointed to see you? No, that's what God wants from us. Exactly that experience. I'd like to share a story with you that was told this past week at the community during this storytelling evening that's happening on Wednesdays. I don't know if it's every Wednesday or once a month, but once a month. But Lakshmi told me this story, so I got this story from Mahavir, but it was so wonderful. There was a monk who was part of SRF. This is not Swamiji, but the monk was there at about the same time as Swamiji, who worked pretty closely with Master, it seems, or at least was very certainly dedicated and involved. And he told this story of a man who appeared at the Encinitas Hermitage one day, found the gate, which many of you have seen, and just walked in, and it turns out that Master Yogananda was outside on the grounds. And Master said to him, at least it's what the monk said, you are not supposed to be here. But then the monk said, Master very quickly went over to him, gave him a blessing, and welcomed him in. So the man stayed. He became a monk at SRF. Master later explained to a few that he had been a disciple in a previous life, and he was just horrible. He was just constantly doing everything wrong, and he actually created some very bad karma, and he left. He left of his own accord. So Master was sort of saying, you're not supposed to be back here. Well, of course, obviously he was, because there he was. So he became a monk, and the monk that was telling this story said, you cannot imagine what a nuisance this man was. Everything he touched went wrong, everything, and he was always underfoot. He said finally Master sent him to Arizona when they were starting a small temple there. He was telling the story as if Master was saying, like, I'm going to get this guy out of Encinitas. But he said this monk would call Master, and he wanted to make sure he got his undivided attention. So he would call him at 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, wake him up and talk to him. So we get the feeling of who this man was, still not exactly creating great karma. Master then went out to the desert to write, which we all know because Swamiji went with him for a good amount of that time. Well, so did the monk who was telling this story. And Master said to the monks, whatever you do, don't tell him where I am. I have to focus on my work. But the monk said he was working outside one day, and all of a sudden a car pulls up, and the door opens, and there's the man. And this monk looked at him and said, "How did you know?" Because he was implying that very few people at the hermitage knew. And the monk, the troublesome monk, just sat there and he said, "I didn't." He said, "I just couldn't bear it anymore. So I sat in my car and I kept saying to God and to Master, 'Bring me to Master, bring me to Master. You must bring me to Master.'" And Master said with such devotion, he just found himself out in the desert where Master was. The point being, and why this story is so important and that story is so important, these are Master's words at the end of the troublesome monk ordeal. He said, devotion of that kind, that depth, when somebody wants God that badly, it sort of overrides all of the past karma and the reincarnation, anything that you've done that's been downward pulling, that you think you're going to have to live out and neutralize your karma. He said, God's love, God's heart does not follow the physical laws of the universe that way. The one thing that God can't resist is devotion. So whether it's healing, whether you're a monk who just desperately needs to be near your guru, no matter how bad you are in the world, and apparently by Master's own word, this monk was difficult. But in the end, it didn't matter. Devotion is what matters. It's how we heal. It's the extraordinary opening of our heart, and then prayers are answered. Healing occurs. Love flows in. And again, and it's so important, we don't have to deal with every one of our shortcomings with all of our karma. It's so beautiful and simple. And Krishna is saying, I'll make this permanent. You come to me. You love me. You do it as much as you can until it's incessant. And not only will I make good your deficiencies, I'll make that permanent. What a beautiful lesson and promise.
Empty streets I wend. I've seen a star rise in the east, and I'm looking for a friend to going, good shepherd folk? From a lowly valley we ascend. A wondrous vision sent us here. We're looking for a friend to rule. Men, where are you going? Our soul's long journey we would end. Therefore we've come to Bethlehem, looking for a friend. Do-ru-ru-ru-ru-lay. Do-ru-ru-ru-lay. Good people, let me come with you. Perhaps he's just around this bend. But whether near or far, I too have been looking for a friend. Do